my screen and then start the recording. Oh, thank you, Kadia. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So, and it's just the slides, not the notes, right?
It's just the slide.
Great. So let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I hope that you've been liking the conference so far. We had two wonderful sessions. And now we are straight into the third session titled Effective Science Communication in the Age of Misinformation. So very excited to have our great speakers here. And I will introduce them one by one, starting with Dr. Assel Mussabekova, who holds a PhD in molecular biology from the University of Strasbourg. And during the pandemic, she started to give public talks and write about viruses and vaccines on social media. She actively participated in Med Support Project, wrote articles about coronavirus and other infectious diseases in outlets in Kazakhstan. She also co-authored a project called Rollan Faces, and actually a few of those people from that project are actually participating in our conference today. And then throughout the last 4 years, she's been working as an immunization consultant at UNICEF on a country and regional level, precisely speaking Europe and Central Asia. And this work led to important policy changes in the field of immunization in Kazakhstan, as well as to the creation of the first official website about vaccination called YeguKZ. She's a certified trainer in effective communication and conducts training for journalists on science and medical journalism. Thank you, Assel, for joining us. We also have Dr. Kamila Rollan here with us, who is an inclusive education lead and an assistant professor at SDU University. She holds a PhD in education from the University of Cambridge and a master's degree with honors in educational leadership from Nazarbayev University. Previously, she worked as an education and child protection expert at UNICEF, head of Education for All nonprofit association, and an independent researcher and consultant on inclusive education. Her research focuses on inclusive education and educational policy more broadly. And we also have Nariman Amantayev, who is a soon-to-be PhD graduate at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. We are also proud to say that he is a member of our association, even though he didn't know about it until a few minutes ago. He holds a master's degree in multilingual education from Nazarbayev University, and his research interests are in the executive functions of the brain and their role in communication of people with autism. So one round of applause for our speakers. I guess one thing that is not mentioned on your screen and wasn't covered by me in their bios is that Assel, Kamila, and Nariman are all engaged in educational activities on important social issues and work tirelessly to raise awareness about vaccines, autism, neurodiversity, and inclusion in general. They're also excellent communicators of complex and scientific evidence. They use their voice to fight mis and disinformation on a consistent basis. And I'm sure you all have seen the names of these incredible human beings in popular media outlets, heard them speak at various public events and podcasts, and of course, read their posts on Instagram. We are delighted to have you on this panel today and can't thank you enough for finding time to chat with us. Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because I guess, as speakers, you don't wanna look at yourselves on the screen. And we can, get into the Q&A, and for the format of this session, it's, pretty basic. I ask questions that I prepared, myself, but also happy to take questions in the chat. So if anyone in the audience has a specific question, please feel free to drop those into the chat, and we'll try to cover those in our conversation. So I'm gonna start with because we're talking about science communication, I'm going to start, with one question, which is, I guess, important for me. And that is, why is it important for researchers to communicate with public? Uh, and like, why should I, for example, start using social media to project my expertise? Because as researchers, we do a lot of research. Sometimes we're working in the labs, in an isolated fashion. Nobody knows what we're doing. But then, on the other hand, you three are very active on social media. You are experts in your fields. Well esteemed among your peers, but also among the public. So, why do you think it is important for researchers and academics to communicate with the public? And there is no particular order. You can jump in one by one.
Okay, if you want, I can start. Yeah. I think as a researcher, you don't have to go public. I mean, it's not the obligation, that's for sure. There are different kinds of researchers, there are different kinds of even the characters. It depends on what you want to do. You can be stuck in the lab, that's absolutely fine. You do your contribution. So there is absolutely no obligation. I think this is important to understand this, because if you go like to medical doctors, like if you go to Kazakhstani Instagram or Russian Instagram, and you see the medical doctors who are dancing in Instagram reels, also, whether it's good or bad, we don't know exactly, but each profession has the obligations, and there are some additional stuff which can come with that, but this is definitely not an obligation. But it will definitely enrich you because it will give you more skills. So we're speaking here about the communication skills, about how to simplify some very complicated concepts, how to find your audience. But I suggest you to do this only if you care. So, because when we speak about communication, like if you have like basic communication strategy, what do you have? You have the mission, then you select target audience, then you identify your key messages, and then you choose your channels of communication. So these are the four components of the communication strategy. So first and foremost is the mission. And mission is that you care about something. So my problem was that I came out in the social media in the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, okay, nobody doesn't know a lot of things about coronavirus. Nobody knows what's the difference about virus and bacteria. And of course, there are many people who refuse vaccination because they don't have the basic information about this and they don't have this trust. So this is when I started, like, this was my mission. Mission is a big word, but still it is important. So you start to communicate usually when you care about some problem, or if you want to do some fun, and you want to present your research, that also will be a good idea and good reason to start your blog on Instagram or whatever. But usually when you actually identify a problem that you care about, usually this works well because you really have something to say about. This is, yeah, my starting point.
I totally agree, to be honest. There are no any obligations on researchers or clinicians to start doing, I don't know, to write posts on Instagram or LinkedIn. But from personal experience, I just started my I don't know, this educational trip to autism awareness just because I felt bad for autistic people in Kazakhstan. And this thanks to our laboratory meetings when me and my professor and my other lab members, we were just discussing all this. It was related to language and terminology problems in autism research. And then I realized that actually Kazakhstan now not on this level to actually consider these kind of problems, because we way below this. We simply need to translate and explain parents like the basics of autism. And I thought, okay, I have internet connection. I know the topic. I know the context of Kazakhstan, so why not? So that was the whole reasoning behind this. So if you do not feel like you want to do some influential work, that's totally fine. Don't do this.
I would agree with the colleagues. In the libertarian philosophy, there is no obligation. However, if you are someone like egalitarian, like myself, I would like to put an argument that there is certain obligation of a scientific community to communicate knowledge, because we are members of a privileged community which got unique access to knowledge that is not otherwise widespread, especially in the context that science is incredibly privatized. There are not many researchers that publish in open access. I'm trying now to publish all my papers in open access, but some journals just simply do not allow it. So for the general population to access certain information, they would have to know where to access information, to know what journals are most reputable, and actually pay for it, unless you have affiliation with a certain institution that can cover that fee for you. So in the example of Dr. Assel, the COVID-19, so many questions, people would like to make evidence-based decisions. However, to access the most recent research on that, if I would not be affiliated with any university at that point, I would have to pay, £30 or dollars for an article. Depends. I mean, there's a range that you need to pay, and so that makes knowledge to access to super important knowledge so privileged. And so, if we acknowledge that privilege that we have, being that members of that super elite community, if we acknowledge that positionality, then I think we can also fairly make up a statement that there is a certain civil responsibility of us being the privileged population to communicate to those people that happens to not have that privilege. And so in that sense, especially in my area of inclusion, which is specifically targeting the most vulnerable populations, I have that mindset or that philosophy that I have to make my research public. I have to support open science. I have to support those vulnerable populations that otherwise would not have access to that information. So I think it really depends on your personal philosophy. You have been the American Association with Canada. I mean, it's a very libertarian society in its nature. And then just to counterbalance that, I think we can think about, is there any moral obligation of us beyond our individualistic desires?
Thank you
Can
for
I,
your.
can I follow on the point of Kamila? Because it's very beautiful, and it's very beautifully put, Kamila. Thank you very much. And I think the project where I participated from the beginning of the pandemic is called Support KZ. That was exactly the project that was about access to the knowledge. So what we did, we gathered like about 100 doctors and scientists, and we started to access. It was actually risk communication. Why? Because like every day you had a new piece of information about coronavirus, and we have translated it and provided a very short description of new methods to our doctors who were working in intensive care. And that was exactly something about that Kamila is talking about the access to the knowledge, which we have privileged to have this access and to understand, and not only understanding English language as it is, but also understanding the scientific language. And that's also quite an important, like our role is to as a translator of the scientific language and to make it available for the general public. But knowing that the scientists, especially the scientists in Kazakhstan, they already have a lot of, like, what I was trying to say that we have our mandate, like we have our like we are getting, like the scientists is getting paid for this. And in Kazakhstan, because I worked in Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev University for 3 years, we were also ordering the equipment, we were doing the purchase, we were doing the cleaning sometimes, we were, like all of the things which are not related to science. If we will add science communication as something obligatory, it will also have, sometimes it will be the burden for the scientists. So that's why I think we should come from the position of why do I care? And like, where is the problem is? And like that probably will be more useful in our communication. But it doesn't contradict. I think the 2 points don't contradict, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how, it sounds like, we as researchers, being educated and working abroad might actually have like two privileges, right? So one being researchers scientists having access to the knowledge, but also being privileged in a way that we don't have to do those extra things that researchers do in Kazakhstan, like Assel mentioned, some of the administrative work and sometimes even doing the cleaning, right? So we have the privilege of, I guess, having more flexibility, maybe more resources to communicate the knowledge that we have. Great, thank you for those responses. And I'm going to turn to the second question, which is, again, I guess in a way it's a personal question, because sometimes I also want to go into social media, LinkedIn, and start posting something, but then that imposter syndrome kicks in, and I worry about looking as not being like expert, or looking like a pseudo expert among the peers, among the scientists, while trying to communicate in simple terms to general public. So how do you balance being clear and simple for the public while also maintaining the credibility among your peers?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I just probably want to say that there are no specific rule, so how to balance between these two. But what usually I do, I just follow the traditional sections from academic writing. So I just in my posts on Instagram, I maintain transparency with regards to all the limitations of the concept I'm trying to translate. So you just need to acknowledge all these limitations, and you need to be sure, you need to make sure that you actually explain this to your target audience, so they know that you certainly don't want to overgeneralize some data to other aspects of this. So yeah, just be as clear as possible and be honest. That's my advice.
Yeah, if you want, I can continue. So basically, I think that you cannot explain anything if you don't know your stuff. So science communication trains you a lot in your own subject. Because if you think about it, like even explain to a kid, and especially explain to a kid, sometimes it's very complicated because you have to simplify, but you cannot lie. So you really have to be clear about what you know and you don't know. The problem with the pseudo experts and experts, so basically the basics of science communication, it should be evidence specific first. And second, it should be, it should be evidence-based and audience-specific. So evidence-based is usually fine, but audience-specific, we can have some problems, especially if you think about the communication which comes from the government. Like if you ever read some of the press releases from the Ministry of Health or something like this. Yeah, of course, there is evidence, but sometimes the message doesn't go to the audience. When you take the pseudo experts, you have the contrary. So you have the audience specific. They are really nice in their conversations. They're very empathy based. They really propose you, all of their smiles and their eyes are on you, etc. However, they have problem with the evidence. So what we have to do, we have to have the both. So how can we do that? So for example, we can use analogies, but analogies is a tricky one because analogies have to be good and simple. For example, when I explain vaccines, I say that vaccine is like, so infection is like a criminal and vaccine is like a criminal's portrait, from the Western kind of movies. You have the portrait. And this is a very good analogy because it actually does tell you of what our immunity does, because we get the information from the vaccine as a portrait, and we're getting special police units specifically for this criminal. So this is a very good analogy because it actually tells you the truth. But for example, yesterday, some doctors from one of the polyclinics in Kazakhstan, they sent me a video about vaccination against HPV, and they're like, and they have this whole like theatrical thing about HPV virus and vaccine and immunity and all of this and this. And they have like 10 or even like 20 analogies in this video where they have special effects and like the virus is burned, etc. But they're not true. So they are not mechanistically explaining the mechanism, how it works. So basically, in order to be good in communication, this kind of complicated concepts, you have to know the concepts. So your science communication comes from your basic knowledge. So the knowledge comes first, then come the communication skills. So you can be very good in communication skills, but if you don't know your stuff, you will not be able to explain. So that's why it actually goes both ways. As soon as you start going online publicly, you actually double check yourself all the time. So when a parent asked me a question about vaccines, I would go to my textbooks back to my university days, and I would double check. So because you feel the responsibility for what you're saying. Of course, in research, when we write articles, when we cite papers, we also feel the responsibility. But when you're actually replying to a parent who asks health-related questions, and I think Nariman and Kamila, they can relate, you will actually double check your knowledge. And this is how the communication that you give to public and to the people will actually enrich your knowledge. So it goes, yeah, both ways.
I agree.
Thank you. And actually, that well, Assel, you started talking about the the emotions and how there's so much of it, like on social media, in the media landscape in general. And I was actually listening to a podcast where speakers were reflecting on the recent U.S. elections and how the facts, evidence, and like well-reasoned arguments didn't really move the voters' opinion, and the emotions that were projected by the other side, played a bigger role. And we, I guess, as researchers, we rely on data, and we always try to build those logical, cause and effect relationships. But there is that big, emotional element, especially when you're talking to vulnerable populations. So how do you effectively communicate in such a landscape, where emotions often outweigh the evidence, right? So Assel talked about how you double check yourself on the evidence side, before you communicate it to the person on the other side. But how do you manage the emotional side? So do you still project it in your communication? Does it play like a second-hand role? So basically talking about the emotional element of science communication.
You can be pretty emotional. I mean, you can be just yourself. As Nariman said, you be honest, and the public, they will feel that because you have to be yourself. And I'm pretty emotional. I mean, if you talk about I don't know, the character. So I was actually told by my PhD supervisors that I'm too emotional for science. That's why I don't continue in the academic research. But you can actually be emotional, but you have to be just evidence-based. What you can do, how you can use emotions. So first of all, yeah, things like analogies that will speak to your audience. So for example, when I was speaking about the risks of infection and sarqat on one of the podcasts recently, it was very, very touching, apparently, for our audience, because this is a sacred part of a Kazakh soul, and I was saying that it gives you infections. So this is how you actually stimulate the thinking. The second way, what you can do, there is a lot of storytelling involved. So for example, when we did a project which is called Privitka on the website vlast.kz, we had the actual real stories of Kazakhstani families where children have had measles or pertussis or this kind of very dangerous infections, where they had very serious complications because of the diseases, because they were not vaccinated. So when you start from the actual story about a single child, a specific person, it gives you a lot of information, a lot more, like you can give a lot more information than just giving a lecture. And then finally, you can use visuals. You can be very, yeah, like if you have For example, the project that we're doing now, it's called Saubol. Please go and see it. I'm going to put the link in the chat, because we have worked a lot on the visuals of how we can have the Kazakhstani identity and to speak about antibiotic resistance and to speak about zoonotic infections, but how we can stay ourselves. We can stay people from Kazakhstan and relate this to ourselves. And this was done by the visual. So these are the three things that you can use.
Yeah, I would like to support what Dr. Assel said about the use of storytelling. When we've done research in 2021 for a Zim platform public foundation, which is the foundation, but also the product, the app, to inform parents of children with special needs and disabilities about early development and early intervention to support their children. We've done research among 121 participants across various regions of Kazakhstan, and we analyzed what are the information needs of those parents. And interestingly, the number one demand was we want stories, was specifically the participants would use the words such as blogs or vlogs. So they say, when we ask, what kind of information would you like to see on the app? The parents were like, stories, because I feel like they need that emotional support element. And so there is a way to communicate science using that storytelling, making it more relatable. Is that on some level an emotional manipulation? To be honest, I would tend to say yes. However, if we're going to look at most successful things, successful politicians, successful projects, there is lots of manipulation involved. As long as you've been aware and you try your best to be ethical in that inclusion of emotional element, I think that can increase the dissemination of information while minimizing the amount of just simple emotional manipulation, and rather using it as a strategy to cater for the needs of the audience. Because yeah, our research showed this was the most needed thing. No one wanted research. People said we want stories. So I'm totally second that. Storytelling is a very important strategy.
Totally agree. Just to add from my side is that it's not an emotion, but I try to invoke from time to time emotions from my audience by using humor in my stories and in my posts, and it helps to reduce the degree of tension in my readers, because I'm writing about very sensitive topic, and I actually, on contrary, I'm dealing with the emotional parents on a daily basis, because they keep sending me messages about their children, and usually those parents did not accept the diagnosis of their kids. So that's why it's from time to time. It's always hard, but now I'm just getting used to this. And yeah, so I use humor as a coping mechanism for myself and for my readers. But if you decided to do this, please be aware that it's a very thin ice, and especially in this super sensitive topic about children health. And yeah, if you're not sure, don't do this. Thank you.
And I love your sense of humor. I follow you on Instagram, and I love how you try to be evidence based in that you always include the citations, and sometimes I'm like, do people share about do people care about those citations? But then as a researcher, I totally understand why you do that. That's probably the credibility part of it, right? And then, but you also add that humor in there. So thank you for your answers. So I guess talking about the audience, continuing the conversation, it's easy, I guess, to dismiss, right? So the bill to dismiss people who believe in misinformation or disinformation by saying, by labeling them like, they are uneducated, they are lazy, or like, they're populist. But how do you move beyond those judgments, right, to better understand and address the deeper reasons behind why people believe in misinformation? or do you need to do it at all? Like, do you need to understand those reasons, or is it just okay, to operate within that framework of, let's say, they are uneducated, they're lazy, and that's fine. So I will just educate them, in a simpler, superficial way without really worrying about the deeper reasons.
If I can start, because this is something that I do since 4 years. So I actually moved from calling everybody anti-vaxxers to actually being more compassionate and having more empathy based. And I think it was since the beginning, like when I entered the world of the social media, I was like, yeah, you tend to be polarized, and social media helps you to be polarized. So in social media, we like something, and then we are surrounded by something that we like. Social media proposes us everything what we like, and like that, you are more sure about your views, and you are less ready to accept some other views. So this is very dangerous. That's why it's very easy to call somebody like anti-vaxxers or rakabesi or something else and put the labels on the people. And this, of course, it doesn't work, because it's very important to distinguish disinformation and misinformation. So disinformation is something that comes from on purpose, from certain groups or from certain people who have some benefit. And when we talk about vaccinations, there are several pieces of research that have been done, including the one by UNICEF Kazakhstan, where we have about 20 people, only 20 people, who are actually making the disinformation about vaccination. So these are the people who are aiming to do it and who are aiming to disseminate it. And they have some of their objectives, like political influence. They have some money related objectives. We can also name some of the people who are selling alternative medicines or supplements. They have a big interest to disseminate disinformation about vaccines. But these are not many. These are just the tip of the iceberg. So you should not be talking to them, because they have their own objective, and they're doing that because they need to do that for their own good. But what you have also, you have misinformation, and misinformation are the people who are following the disinformation, and they're disseminating it because they are losing trust. Because the main reason of misinformation is distrust into the government. We can take official medicine, doctors in general, or for example, if we're talking about health or anything like educational institutions, if you talk about the topic of Kamila, for example, right? So this distrust actually gives them these doubts, and where they see the disinformation, they start to disseminate it because they don't trust the actual government and the institutions which exist in the country. That's why you should be talking. So we as science communicators, we should not be talking to disinformators. We should be talking to the people who are in doubt. And these are the mostly, so they are many. This is mostly the population that we should be talking to. And when we're speaking to them, okay, wait, what was the question? What was, okay, Anya, please help me here, because I lost my thought.
Do you actually try to understand the deeper reason?
Yes, okay, yeah, sorry. Yes, and it's very important to understand why. So where this distrust is coming from. So for example, when we talk about vaccines, it's usually fear. So the parents have the fear that they will have some consequences after the vaccination. They have heard of something and they don't know, they don't have the basic knowledge, but they also have basic emotions. So they have fear and they are caring about their children. And we should use that. We should explain them that if you care about your children, actually the right decision is to vaccinate. But we should talk to them in a human way. So when I was, we had a lot of projects with UNICEF Kazakhstan. We have provided some of the training to the healthcare workers, about 2,500 healthcare workers. It's many, actually, if you think about that, that we gave them the algorithm. So the algorithm is called CASE, C-A-S-E. So C is corroborate, A is about you, S is science, and E is explain. What is this algorithm? It means that you have to start by actually acknowledging their fear. So first thing that you say, this is like active listening. You say, yeah, I understand that you are afraid that vaccines will cause autism. So for example, if a parent comes to you with this question, the first thing that you say, you become their friend and not their enemy. You go, yeah, I understand. I mean, many people think so. And with all of this information, you can be lost. So this is how you find the first contact. Second thing, case. So you go about you. So you actually tell something about you. For example, I usually say, I myself, I have 4 children, all of them are vaccinated, but I do understand that it's, yeah, you have a lot of information, there's a lot of fear, and I myself, as a mother, definitely understand you. So you're speaking about yourself. Then you turn to S, to science. Then you give some data. You say that, you know, in Denmark, there was this study about autism and vaccines, which showed that there is no relation whatsoever, etc. And then you explain that for your kid, like for Nurlan, the baby Nurlan who came here today, you are going to have to vaccinate, so this and this vaccine, etc. So only like that. If you throw the data straight away without considering who is in front of you, you will most likely lose this person. So this person most likely will not vaccinate or will not come back. And this doesn't take a lot of time, because we have checked this algorithm, how it works in real life. It just adds you maybe 2 minutes of time in your conversation, but it changes the conversation completely, because you start from their point of view, you speak about yourself as a human being, and then you go into the data. Like that, I think we can use the actual knowledge about effective communication in practice to understand the audience that you're speaking to.
Kamila, Nariman, do you have anything to add about
I can add about labeling people that do not necessarily agree with science as mrakabesi, the word that Dr. Assel used. Of course, it's very tempting to do this. But for example, let me give you an example from my area, right? The disability studies. So UNICEF in 2017 in Tajikistan made a study about the perceptions of disability among general population. 37% of the general population in Tajikistan believe that disability is caused by God's punishment. Now, we can call it being misinformed about disability, but I can also reframe it as having a religious model of disability. Now, there are multiple models, a dozen, if not more, of disabilities. So I work within the human rights model or a biopsychosocial model. I see disability as a basis for fulfilling human rights of every individual that are secured by various conventions. I'm not going to cite them unless you want me to. But I also see it as a biopsychosocial phenomena, which means there are some biological sort of reality to it in this positivist nature, but there's also huge social and personal experience that shapes what disability actually is. Now, if a person tells me, well, disability is a challenge that Allah gave to test the family, instead of putting myself as, oh, this is someone I disagree with. You know, in sociology, we say in and out groups. They're not in my group. This is the out group. I'm going to avoid them. I can rather reframe it as saying, well, they have a religious model of disability, and I try to build a dialogue within that modality. What if God, you know, I mean, I'm not going to now manipulate you, but I'm trying to build dialogue within that sense. You know, if we speak about vaccination, why did God give us the knowledge about biology and vaccination? This knowledge was given to us. So I'm trying to use the language that would be most understandable within the philosophy of that population. So I think that in combination with the strategies mentioned earlier could be a more effective way rather than just shutting a whole group of population down because they disagree with us. I think that would be really arrogant to do. And then what's the point of your job then if you're are you trying to only cater for the needs of those people that agree with you? That's a very narrow population. So I think approaching the people you disagree with compassion, seeing the variety of philosophical approaches, how people live their lives and how they make what they base decision making on would make you just a more inclusive leader in your area.
I'm just adding, first of all, this was amazing insights from my colleagues, and I totally agree with them. And I just wanted to add my personal experience from what I'm trying to do in these situations, and maybe this would be helpful for all of you who are planning to work with debunking myth and misconceptions in your respect in your field. So usually what I'm doing, I'm trying to meet people where they are when they come to me. So it's a very if you will try just to attack the myth or misconception, such as, let's say, vaccination and the vaccination causes autism, for example. So you can just go ahead and write that, no, this is not true, and and throw some data, as I said. Yeah, this will probably not work out because there are different people who reading you, and you need to acknowledge and understand this. You need to understand who's your target audience. So, for example, you need to understand the context of these problems, because when I talk about the vaccination and autism in Canada, and when I talk about vaccination and autism in post-Soviet countries, these two would be different narratives. In some sense, they are, of course, similar, but there will be differences because we need to understand the context of the people, where they came from. And in Kazakhstan, it's also shaped by our healthcare programs in universities, political agenda, and how we actually treating misinformation in our country. And you just need to understand that people, as I said, and as Kamila said, it's not they just believe that, okay, this is the problem. No, it's all about fear, and this comes this fear was shaped by their environment. So instead of just talking about the chemical what vaccine contains of, instead of just talking about this, we can go back to the root of this misconception and talk about, let's say, Andrew Wakefield, right? This gastroenterologist who started this problem with MMR vaccine and autism back in 90s. So, and we can just present it in the way that originally this article that started all of these problems, it was originally, in essence, it was fraud, and it was retracted. So just begin with earlier, instead of just trying to reshape this reality when they living in. Just go back and explain the roots of their beliefs, and maybe this will also help you to kind of direct them towards the right, I don't know, more evidence-based decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm truly loving your responses. How you are touching, different aspects of science communication. We'll probably have time for a couple more questions, so I definitely want to ask one question from the chat. But before that, I would like to pose a question about, the role of partnerships. Could be like with journalists, educators, or policymakers. So how to start or build such partnerships? Because as far as I know, like you all have partnerships, you're part of different projects, you've established some projects in partnership with organizations. So how do you establish those partnerships in relationships?
I think it depends on what you want to achieve, because your science communication can be just for the sake of science communication. So there you could partner with some other communicators. You can have some collaborations on Instagram. You can have some media outlets, etc. So this is like the purpose of informing or making science fun, which is a beautiful, beautiful objective. The second objective might be the advocacy, because it's very often when science communicators, they turn into advocacy specialists, because when you communicate some of the problems, you understand that they have usually some systemic gaps. Usually, it's always the problems in the system. There is a problem with the legislation. Something is not controlled in the right way. And as soon as and this is actually the answer to one of the questions in the chat of how can it actually lead to your new career. It can lead to a career of the advocacy specialist in some field. So for example, me, this is what I'm doing now. And if you want to have this element of advocacy, you should be able to communicate to the government and to the policymakers. And this is very important because what I see on the social media very often, people go like, Tokayev online, Minister of Health, Minister of Education, like you put like at everybody and you go like, wow, you're not doing anything, and like, or this person is doing everything for you. And so we start with the blame. And if we start with the blame, it's the same. Like there is no point. Like you are not actually making, you're not going to make it a communication, and you're not going to make it effective if you straight away start to blame the policymakers. So you have to be productive. You have to be very evidence-based. You have to be very informative in this communication, and you have to understand that in any of the ministries that you take, any of the governmental body, you also have people who are working there. So this is not just because sometimes we say the government is supposed to do this, the ministry is supposed to do this, but these are actual people who are making our laws, who are writing the things, who have their families, etc. So you try to make the connection with actual people. And for me, it was a very actually life-changing for me when I started to properly communicate with the people who are policymakers, and I understood that they have their limitations. They work until midnight. They are very good technical specialists, but they don't manage always to change the system as they want. But we scientists actually can help them. Scientists can be advocacy specialists. We can bring the evidence into our legislation if we're able to be this bridge in between the audience and the policymakers. And this is, for example, the example that I'm giving is the website about vaccination, which we managed to make with the Ministry of Health. This is the official governmental website, but it's completely evidence-based, and it's very nice in terms of visuals, etc. And another example is we managed actually last year to change the legislation about vaccination. And this was done with the help of the doctors that you can see on Instagram. So everything what they do on Instagram, all the communications that they have with the parents, every single complaint about the previous legislation, previous law, it was moved into this change of the law. And we actually managed to change the basis of how vaccination is done in Kazakhstan. And this is, I think, is amazing, because this is how you can communicate with the parents and with the target audience. You can transfer your messages to the policymakers and actually bring some changes. So yeah, I think it's very important to be able to communicate with the partners where you want to see a change.
Assel, to clarify, so is it are those partnerships something that you sought out yourself, or is that the other way around, where they come to you and they say like, oh, you have the expertise, you are very active on social media.
Definitely, you have to be proactive. Well, I mean, in my field, you have to be proactive. I am very open in my requests, and I'm very open. Like if the parents tell me that in this region, in this polyclinics, we don't have this vaccine, I'm going to be very proactive, telling that to the policymakers. And this is unfortunately how it works sometimes. You want to see big changes. You have to start with very small details where you can be this bridge. But if they see that you are proactive, and if they see that you are actually helping and not just complaining, that the government doesn't do this and this, they will actually come forward as well. So and then we have this like two-way communication, which is quite nice.
Definitely, in terms of the strategy, being communicative about your research is super important to establish yourself in a way that you can leverage effective partnerships. In our area, where me and Nariman are, there are lots of other people that do this research, but if they're not out there publicly, no one knows them. Like specifically about inclusion, there are other specialists in Kazakhstan. I know them from my experience, but no one ever hears their names. So most of the partnerships or most of the partners would normally reach out to me. And so I think that's the huge benefit of us being communicative about science, in establishing that advisory positionality. And I think this is an important function of a scientific community, is advisory, maybe not necessarily leading a certain transformation, but being there on the sort of second row, advising to the policymakers or to the civil society, or to the businesses, so whatever partnership you're mostly focusing on. So from my experience, I am a member of the working group of the Ministry of Enlightenment on inclusive education reform. So this is where I can leverage my knowledge to bring some positive policy change. But I'm also on the board of directors of several non-governmental organizations to help them in those bottom-up advocacy. So I feel like that positionality of I'm out there, I'm public, I'm open, I'm speaking about our research. I'm not just doing science in the lab or in the office. This is super important if you want to succeed, not just in leveraging partnership, but actually in developing your career overall, I would say. Lots of my job opportunities, actually, it's funny, but they came from Instagram. Some of the most interesting projects. As of recently, I was invited to become an advisor to the new museum that is being opened in Almaty, the Almaty Museum of Modern Arts. And they just reached out to me, via pretty much social media, saying, can you help us increase the accessibility and inclusivity of not just museum, but also the artwork itself. And I can definitely owe a lot to social media. So, like if you feel ashamed to dance on TikTok, that's sort of the metaphor of sometimes being, ashamed to put yourself out there in social media. And that might be connected to your earlier question about having imposter syndrome. Don't. It's to your benefit, first and foremost, to be out there and to not be ashamed to share your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you. Wonderful answers. Nariman, do you have anything to add?
No, just wanted to add to the listeners about these media and journalists. They will come to you as soon as you start providing some value and expertise in your field. So please just focus on your competence in your field. That's it.
There we go. That's probably the best strategy for those who are, thinking about going live on social media. So we have only a few minutes left, so I'm going to finish up with the question in the chat. Unfortunately, the only question in the chat, but I'm guessing we're touching on a lot of things, and listeners, happy with the responses that you're providing. So the question is, how showcasing your expertise on social media help you in real life? Could be, work opportunities or even in your personal life. What are the benefits, of showcasing the expertise to the public?
I think in my answer, I just sort of provided a response to that question. So I allow Assel and Nariman to add on this.
I can tell probably from the perspective, and this is the next part on women. I think it goes very well with that because I have 4 kids. They're small. I need to be with them. I need to spend a lot of time. But thanks to my openness on the topics where I am an expert, I have these work opportunities where I can actually work from home. Because I could not, after my PhD defense, I could not continue in academic science because it was just not compatible with the lifestyle that I'm living. We're both scientists with my husband, we have kids, we move a lot, and working with UNICEF, writing for the media outlets, making this media project. It's not only, it's actually mostly volunteering. Still, for me, it's mostly volunteering, but it's actually also very good job opportunities, especially for women who are able to combine the career and the family life, which is also very important. And I think thinking outside of the box, thinking outside the academia, or trying some other types of the careers, yeah, it can give you this flexibility. But it usually comes from your own will when you care. So if you care and if you do it well and you have your background knowledge, the opportunities will come to you, that's for sure.
You know, I was thinking about this, and since people mostly know me in Kazakhstan and maybe Russia, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, and given that I'm living in Canada, I do not have any practical. It doesn't help me at all in my daily life. Maybe when I move back to Kazakhstan, maybe I might get some job because of this, but now I'm just keep living my pathetic academic life in Canada, and that's it. Sorry, it's not very
Oh, no
inspiring
Canadian asks
answer,
you
but
for an autograph.
no, not at all.
Okay.
Even my supervisor, she hates me probably.
Because you spend a lot of time on social media,
Yeah.
working with the public. But well, while you're not, benefiting from what you're doing in your daily life, I'm, certain that the public in Kazakhstan, in the region, is benefiting tremendously from the work that you are doing, Nariman, and of course the work that Kamila and Assel are doing on their side as well. So we're going to transition into the next session, and I just want to thank you, Assel, Kamila, and Nariman, for coming in and sharing your experiences and expertise with us. It was a wonderful session, at least for me, and I hope that it was the same for the rest of the audience. Wish you good luck in your future and current projects. Let's keep in touch. And we'll see you in the future in a virtual or, I guess, in-person environment.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks a
everyone.
lot.